few weeks ago, I was at a conference, very different to this one. All conferences are, I think. And I was talking to this guy, and I noticed he had this really interesting tattoo on his forearm, all across the forearm. And it said, Amor Fati. And Amor Fati, you might have heard of it, a very central concept to the Stoic philosophy. So we got talking, and I asked him, why did he decide to get it? What is his thoughts about Stoicism? How much is he into the philosophy as a whole? And his answer both surprised me, but also was easy to understand. He said to me, well, I tattooed it because I want this continuous reminder that I need to love the life that I create for myself. I need to love wherever I end up, knowing that I did the best to get there, that I did everything that I could in order to create what I want in this life. And I thought to myself, that's a really nice reminder to have. That's a good interpretation of that term, but it's very different to what the Stoics meant when they say amor fati. And it got me thinking that there's this deeper issue when it comes to Stoicism, which is that we hear about it everywhere. It's become incredibly popular over the past few decades. You read about it, you hear about it in podcasts, whether it's athletes that attribute their success to some Stoic tenet or principle. Even beauty influencers are talking about Stoicism as somehow helping them in their daily routines or whatever it is. And yet, what they're really talking about is not the Stoic philosophy, but some particular principle or practice held in a vacuum, completely unrelated, in fact, from the Stoic philosophy. And so one of the reasons why this has happened is because Stoicism has been watered down. It's gone very far from its original roots. And what I want to do today is to talk about those roots. What is Stoicism in its essence? What is the Stoic philosophy? Not just a quote or a tattoo of a concept, but what does it actually mean to be a Stoic? And then I want to somewhat separate that from the actual Stoics that lived in ancient Rome. Because I think there's tremendous value to be found in this separation from Stoic philosophy and the lives of the Stoics. So we're going to have several parts to this talk. We're going to talk about the philosophy, we're going to talk about the lives of the Stoics, and then we're going to see how we can actually find these principles, these tenets that, although they don't quite stand alone, and if you take the philosophy as a whole, they don't make the same sense, but they could, if adapted to your life, improve it and benefit you. And so the first thing we need to really think about before we delve into the Stoic philosophy is, what are the key questions that philosophy deals with in the first place? If you take this big bucket of philosophy, bucket of the universe, all these tremendous, deep, conceptual questions, and you boil it down, and then you distill it some more, and then you take what's left and you boil it even further, you're left with two questions. The two most fundamental questions that philosophy deals with is, what is there? What is the nature of the universe? What is the nature of the human? What is the relationship between the two? And then, what should I do? And the second question follows the first. It's, what should I do given my answers to the first question? And so we're going to start by really examining the Stoic answer to the question of what is there. Because in order to understand any Stoic principle or tenet or concept, including amor fati, or even understand what is in your control and what is outside of your control, it is impossible to actually do that in a Stoic framework without understanding their view of the universe, their view of the nature of man. So what is the Stoic answer to this question? First and foremost, there is a God. There is a God, and this God manifests itself through the universe. This God is the universe. This God is everything, and it is in everything. So there's a fragment of God in literally everything. There's a fragment of God in me, there's a fragment of God in you, and there's a fragment of God in this Level Up podium. And philosophically speaking, this is known as pantheism, the idea that God is in everything. And so the question becomes not so much what is the nature of the universe, but what is the nature of this God? And the Stoics are very much influenced by various previous philosophies and debates that were ongoing at the time about the nature of the physical nature of the universe, really. And so the Stoics, they understand that this God is a lawful God. It's an orderly God. It is a God in which everything is necessitated by these laws. And so everything that happens in our world, everything that happens in the universe has to happen because of this order. And not only does it have to happen, but it couldn't have happened otherwise. And this applies just as much as it does to the physical world and physical objects or inanimate objects as it does to animals and as it does to humans. So every action you take needed to happen, must have happened, and couldn't have been otherwise. Philosophically speaking, this is known as determinism. The idea is that you don't have true control over the actions that you take. Somehow, some way or another, every single action you take is necessitated. It could not have been otherwise. But there is some purpose to all of this. Your life outcomes, although determined, although everything that happens is necessitated to follow this orderly structure, there is some meaning in this order. There is a purpose outside of you for why things happen the way they do. Unfortunately, you can't see it because you're just a fragment of this larger whole. But if you could, and the Stoics urge you to, if you could get this broader perspective, where you could step outside of yourself and try to think of things from this macro perspective, you would then see that there is a meaning behind everything that happens, and every seeming chaos in your own life is order in the grand scheme of things. And philosophically speaking, this is known as universal teleology, from the word telos, purpose. There is some sort of purpose outside of you in the universe, in the way things happen. And so we're boiling everything down to the bare essence. And the bare essence of Stoicism is this. They are pantheistic, deterministic teleologists. God is the universe, God is orderly, everything is necessitated according to this order, but it's not meaningless. There is some sort of meaning outside of you towards which everything is moving, and you need to keep these things in mind. The Stoics have this analogy they use. You can think of yourself as like a dog tied to a sled, and this sled is headed in a particular direction, and you have no control over the direction. And as a dog, all you can do is, you can growl, you can bark, you can even try and run in an opposite direction, but it's going. Seneca had this quote. He said, fate drags along the willing, leads the willing and drags the reluctant. Either way you're going. The destination is decided for you, and that's where you're headed. And you can already see, based on this answer, perhaps seeds of where the Stoics are going to take you in their ethics, in their answer to the second question of what should I do? And yet, you might also think, well, there's some sort of conflict here. Because if I am determined, if I have no control over the actions that I take, well then, how can the Stoics prescribe any form of principle or action that I should take in order to live a better life or in order to do whatever it is that I need to do. And there is a conflict here. Every deterministic philosophy has this inner contradiction as soon as they integrate some prescriptive principle. But how do the Stoics try to resolve this? Well, the Stoics see a complete differentiation between the inner world and the outer world. And it's not just a differentiation in terms of these are two different states of being, but these are completely separate for the Stoic. For the Stoic, because of this separation, you actually can preserve some control. You can preserve some remnants of free will. And why is that? Because it applies only to one of these two worlds. You can control your internal world entirely, but as you can see in this diagram, there isn't a reciprocal relationship between these worlds. There's a unilateral relationship in the sense that you can control your inner states of consciousness, but whatever choices you make here bear no impact out here. And so the only thing for the Stoic that maintains this relationship between the two worlds is the fact that things out there still impact you. They impact your consciousness. They impact your thoughts, your feelings, your values. But it only goes one way. And so what happens to ethics, before we even get talking about any particular principle or tenet or concept, what happens to ethics as a discipline, the study of what one should do, simply by this understanding of the nature of man? Well, for one thing, good, evil, bad, no longer have anything to do with what's out there. And they're entirely internalized. So any value that we might think we have, for instance, I value this jumper, this sweater, value my girlfriend, I value many different things, my good health. Well, those things don't actually matter when it comes to ethics. So ethically speaking, they have no value. And so virtue for the Stoic is completely detached from value. Now, as a moral code, this is impracticable. And no Stoic actually lived this way. But that is what the philosophy logically necessitates. And so you think to yourself, well, what kind of person would actually emerge from such a worldview? A worldview where you're determined, you're a fragment of something greater than yourself, your fate is already predestined, and you have no control over the outcomes of your life. Well, the Stoic ethics say one thing and one thing only. If you were really to boil them down, no practices, no principles, no tenets, no concepts, but if you were to just in one sentence say, what do the Stoics' ethics actually prescribe? It's understand everything that we've just said, internalize it until it becomes a part of your thinking. It's so deeply ingrained that anything that ever happens, you view it through this framework. And that is how you will achieve whatever it is that the Stoics claim you will achieve, which we'll talk about in a minute. But the point here is that it is an entirely passive ethics. The ethics here is not about acting, it's not about impacting, but it's entirely about reacting. Because action and impact have been entirely severed from their view of the nature of the human. And you might ask, well, look, if virtue is completely detached from value, well, then why should I do any of these things? Like, why should I follow the Stoic ethics? And obviously, one answer is, well, just recognize this is your place. This is the nature of the universe. This is your nature as a human. Understand that, and don't argue with the facts. But more importantly, and most fundamentally, do your duty. as a fragment of a larger whole, you have a duty that is inherent in your being. And you can think of yourself as like a cell of a larger organism. And as part of a larger organism, every single cell has to perform its function. And if it doesn't, it gets disposed of. You know, if a cell in your body starts to attack itself or starts to act out of line, we take some medicine or perform some treatment and we get rid of it. Because what matters here is not the cell, but the organism. And its purpose is to serve that larger organism. And much like the cell, you need to remember that that is all that you are. And you have a duty to do that. But the Stoics recognized that for most people, that's going to be an insufficient answer. The answer to why should I be a Stoic, the answer being because you should, because you need to do your duty, is not very convincing. And so the Stoics said, well, look, in addition to this, and this is not the primary reason why you should follow the Stoic ethics, but in addition to this, if you did, you will reach a state of tranquility. You will reach a state where you're free of suffering. You will reach a state known as apatheia. And apatheia is the ultimate state of being once you've truly understood the Stoic answer to the question of what is there, accepted it, accepted your place in this universe, fully internalized it, and ingrained it into your framework so that everything that happens and everything that you do is viewed through this lens. And by doing so, and notice how for the Stoic, this state is not a state of elation. It's not a state of overwhelming joy. It's a state where you're free of suffering. And the goal for the Stoic is to rid you of these overwhelming negative emotions. The problem is that when you remove anxiety, you also lose excitement. And when you remove anger, you also lose passion. And when you remove the possibility of suffering, you remove the possibility of happiness, of achieving your values. There's this quote that I want to read by Seneca, which really puts it incredibly succinctly. For the Stoic, the only person who can reach this state of apatheia is the wise sage, the wise man. That's their ideal. And Seneca says to us, the wise man has no reason to fear fortune. Fortune is chance, things that happen to you. He has no reason to fear fortune, since he regards as held on sufferance not only his goods and possessions and status, but even his body, his eyes and hand, and all that makes life more dear, and his very self. And he lives as though he was lent to himself and bound to return the loan upon without complaint. He should say, I am willing for you to have straight away what you gave me, take it. So let's try and take an example and see how this actually looks like, what this actually looks like for the wise sage. So a few weeks ago, a couple months ago actually, there were these awful fires that happened in northern LA. And I'd like us all to try and engage in this exercise from the perspective of the wise sage. So if you can try to accept what I've just described as your view of the universe, as your view of your own nature, try and internalize it at least for the next minute. And think to yourself, you've just come back from this conference, you've arrived in your hometown, you come back home and you see that it's burnt down. You've lost your house, you've lost all of your possessions, maybe even a pet or a loved one. How do you react? Not how do you react, but how does you as the wise sage react? This had to happen. This needed to happen. This served some sort of grander purpose. Do you cry? Are you angry? Do you scream? Are you upset? Well, don't be so unwise. Understand your role in the universe. Try to internalize the idea that this needed to happen and it could not have been otherwise. And there is something positive in the fact that it did happen. And by recognizing that, you can actually live a better life by achieving that state of apatheia. You will be free of suffering if you can forego your attachment to these external things. And this is something that the Stoics practiced. There's anecdotes of Stoics swapping wives with one another. They did this because they felt they were overly attached to their wives. So they would exchange and try to kind of reduce this attachment from the things that they value most. And I told my girlfriend about that and she wasn't happy at all. But anyway, this is what amor fati means. You come back home from this conference, you see your house is burnt down, love your fate. Whatever happens, understand that it needed to be and it serves some higher purpose. Love it. And that is very different than the amor fati that was tattooed on that man's arm. And so is Stoicism medicine for the soul? In a sense, it can be. If you have a very particular condition, if your soul is very sick, well then a limited dose might help you on the road to recovery. But you can overdose. And if you're healthy, it could definitely harm you. And so, although I think that Stoicism as an entire philosophy is harmful, is life-abasing, and I can't help but agree with some of the harshest criticisms. For instance, Nietzsche claiming that it really kills the passionate, beautiful nature and aspects of life. Despite all of that, it doesn't mean that we should throw it out wholesale. And there is so much value in reading and learning about the Stoics themselves. And that's what I want to divert this talk to now. Because although I think we should reject Stoicism and embrace the Stoics, I like to think of the Stoics more like a supplement rather than medicine. They're not going to replace a well-balanced diet, but they can definitely improve your health. And so let's turn to three of the most popular Stoics today. Stoicism is an ancient philosophy. It was born in ancient Greece, but developed under the Roman Empire. And today, the most popular Stoics are by far Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. Now, these Stoics were far more interested in the question of what should I do rather than what is there. But again, it's important to emphasize every single answer to that question is deeply rooted in their view of the universe and the nature of human. So, brief introduction to each of these Stoics. Seneca was born in Spain. During his teens, he made his way to the capital, made his way to Rome. In his life, he accumulated tremendous wealth, power, and status. He became a tutor to Emperor Nero, and later an advisor. And if you know anything about Emperor Nero, you know this could not have been an easy task. Emperor Nero was one of the worst, most tyrannical, megalomaniacal emperors that the Roman Empire had ever seen. And so having to advise such a person Seneca needed to navigate a very complex and difficult terrain. Seneca also was a prolific writer. He wrote plays, consolations, letters, incredibly beautiful and insightful. Epictetus, on the other hand, in stark contrast to Seneca, was born into slavery. He spent the first few decades of his life as a slave, and some of his masters, he changed several different masters. Some of his masters were incredibly sadistic, tortured him. He was eventually, he was lame. He had an issue with his leg. Others were, if I can use such a term, a little kinder. He was able to read. He was able to have access to philosophy, see some of the imperial courts, engage in discourses, etc. And eventually, when he acquired his freedom, and by the way, Epictetus is not his name. Epictetus literally translates to acquired, probably as a sign of pride that he was able to acquire his freedom. Once he did, he founded a school, and he taught philosophy in this school, particularly the Stoic philosophy. He also wrote. We don't have any of his writings left, but we have some recorded conversations and ideas that he had, kind of like with Aristotle. We have student notes. And then finally, Marcus Aurelius, which I'm sure you've all heard of. Marcus Aurelius, born into imperial ranks, became the Roman emperor, most powerful man in the world, not a philosopher, never wrote a single word of philosophy. Why do we include him? Well, Marcus Aurelius journaled to himself. He wrote down his innermost thoughts. He wrote down some exercises on pen and paper, and eventually was compiled into what we know as Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. And so by reading the Meditations, you get to see the man's most private, innermost thoughts. And yet, despite being the most powerful man in the world, despite being a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius by no means had an easy life. He spent almost his entire adult life on the war front. He lost 8 of his children. He was betrayed, and the list goes on and on. And think to yourself, this is the most powerful man in the world, and that's what his life looks like. What must it have looked like for the 99.9999% of the population in Rome? And so I want to take the next few minutes to step into their world so we can get a bit more context. We've talked about their universe. Now I want to talk about their world. Well, firstly, what does the Roman world look like? Well, life expectancy is about 25 years. And this is not because people weren't making it to old age, but it's because infant and child mortality rate were so high. You had about 30% chance of surviving beyond your first year. You had about 50% chance of surviving beyond your 10th year, making it into your teens. So when Marcus Aurelius lost 8 children, that wasn't an exception. It sounds like it to us today, but that was the norm. If you were going to have children in the Roman Empire, most likely you're going to lose children in the Roman Empire. It's almost as if it's fated to be. It's almost as if it's certain that you can expect to lose at least a child. There were horrible sanitary conditions. The Antonine Plague hit during Marcus Aurelius's rule, and 10% of all of the entire Roman population was wiped out. A fever could be the end of your bloodline. You get a cut in your finger, and that could be your fate sealed. We mentioned the tyrants, the absolute tyranny, the whim-worshipping maniacs that, because of indigestion, could decide to send you into exile or execute you. Imagine going back to work, going back to your school, having a disagreement with your boss, with your professor, and them deciding, I don't really like this opinion that you have, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to execute you. And then all of your colleagues, all of your classmates cheer. Well, that was the reality, the literal reality in the Roman Empire. We mentioned Epictetus being a slave. That too was not an exception. 40%, these are estimates, but 40% of the population of Rome were slaves. That's almost every other person that you encounter is a slave. Imagine what that does to your conception of freedom, your conception of being able to actually determine the outcomes of your life. When we watch movies about the Roman Empire and we see these palaces and these really lavish lifestyles, obviously that wasn't the norm too. 95% of the population were living in wooden tenements, which is a room in a very shoddy structure. So life in the Roman Empire was incredibly harsh. Not just for Marcus Aurelius, but for everyone that lived in this world. This is a world of certain death. This is a world of plagues, of disease, of war, of exile. And there is something to be said that there are different ratios of chance versus choice in different societies and cultures, and how much those ratios impact your life. And the ratio in this world is so unbelievably higher towards fortune and chance than it is in the one we live in today. The Stoics have this analogy. You can think of yourself as an archer, and you're aiming at a target, and a million things can happen to make you miss that target. The arrow could snap, someone could tackle you, there could be wind, the target might fall over, etc., etc. And it must have felt that way living in this world. Today, we live in a very different world. And that analogy can be modernized, and you might think of it as, you're no longer an archer in the outdoors aiming at a target, but you're in an indoor range with a sniper rifle. And although it's true that over enough attempts, something's going to happen, you're going to miss the target here and there. But if you're consistent, if you develop the right habits, most likely you'll be hitting that bullseye more often than not. But I think there's something to be said for this as to why Stoicism is seeing a revival today. Because although we don't live in this world anymore, it's undeniable that a lot of people feel like we live in a similar world. A lot of people do feel like they're helpless. They feel like they don't have as much control over their life outcomes as chance and fortune and events outside of themselves. And Stoicism really is a way of dealing with this mindset, with this understanding of the world you live in. And when it comes to the Stoics, we talk about this world. Can you really blame them for trying to find some order in the chaos, some meaning in the destruction? Stoicism will help you survive such a world. Stoicism is a great tool for surviving. The problem is that it is surviving at the cost of thriving. And when you live in such a world, no one's thinking about thriving. Life is only about survival, literally. And so if we do want to thrive, there are some positive ideas, positive principles, positive exercises that the Stoics advise us and prescribe to us. And that's what I want to that's where I want to go now. So if we do want to thrive, what are some positive identifications that the Stoics did make, which we can accept and try to understand, try and incorporate into our system? Well, first and foremost, and this is one of the principles of which Stoics are most famous for, It's dichotomy of control. Understand what is and what is outside of your control. We saw what that means for the Stoic. For the Stoic, there's one thing that's in your control. That's your inner states of consciousness or your reactions. Well, what does it actually, how do we apply this principle to our own lives, though? Well, the first question that every volitional creature, every being, every human that has the ability to choose their actions must ask themselves is, well, where does this realm of choice actually apply? Where can I have impact with the choices that I make? And where is it futile to try and change? What is outside of my control? And so, although the Stoics understood this principle very differently, they were onto something. This is an incredibly important observation. We have to know where we can act and impact and where our action is futile. Now, the Stoics understood that the way to figure these things out is to act in accordance with our reason. The Stoics valued the reason highly. Think about things, be rational. Try to have some sort of explanation for the things that you do that makes sense, that is rational. This ties into the Stoics' view of emotions. Emotions overwhelm us sometimes. Emotions can get the better of reason. Try to ingrain this into your daily thinking, into your everyday thinking. Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Do they make sense? What are the reasons why I take the actions that I take? And try to find if there's any inconsistencies in this, or if it's a fully integrated system of principles. Another understanding that the Stoics had is that external goods, although could be beneficial, are not going to are not going to be the determinant of your happiness, of a well-lived, successful life. And although it's true that, and this is where I diverge from the Stoics, although it's true that you need these things, good health, good relationships, a relatively reasonable level of wealth, these things are by no means a substitute for virtue. Virtue is a necessary condition for happiness. It's a necessary condition for living a good life. And the Stoics look around and they see these emperors and senators, and they have everything. But what do they not have? They don't have good character. They don't have good ideas. They don't have good principles. They're not virtuous. And the Stoics understood the importance of actually being a good person. They also understood that this is an ongoing process. You don't wake up one day and then end up at a point where, okay, now I'm the virtuous person, I'm good, I'm done. It's a continual process where you need to cultivate good habits, you need to develop a strong character, you need to continuously work on it and ingrain different principles again and again and again and again into your thinking, into your framework. And they gave us some useful tools to do this. And then finally, we've already touched upon emotions. Well, for the Stoic, managing your emotions, which is really managing how you react, because our emotions are automatic responses to things that happen. For the Stoic who seeks to remove some of the negative emotions, unfortunately, by doing so, he loses many of the positive emotions. But it is true that we need to learn to manage our emotions. It does happen that we get overwhelmed, that sometimes we're not thinking so clearly. And in reading the Stoics, you actually find really good principles and practices on how to do this, how to manage your emotions, despite the Stoic philosophy having this having this different view of emotions as such. And I want to talk about some of these useful tools that the Stoics prescribe to us. And so these thinkers gave us tremendous exercises that we can use in order to cultivate some of these good ideas, in order to develop this strong character. The first of these goes back to a non-Stoic philosopher, Socrates. Socrates was an ancient Greek philosopher who was by far the most influential on the Stoics. The Stoics idolized him in every single way. They loved his ideas. They loved his life and his life outcome. This tragic life outcome was incredibly Stoic. And more than anything, they loved the Socratic method of philosophizing. The Socratic method of philosophizing, known as the elenchus, is a method of asking questions, probing questions to identify underlying assumptions, premises, or ignorances behind conclusions that someone has or opinions that someone has. And what the Stoics prescribe is that you shouldn't become Socrates. It's not about going out there to your classroom, your workplace, the agora, and asking people these really difficult questions, getting into these debates. But the Stoics say you should internalize Socrates. Internalize the elenchus. There is something incredibly powerful about asking yourself these Socratic questions. I've just missed my bus. I can see it, but I'm a minute late, and I'm incredibly frustrated. Well, ask yourself, is there something I could have done about it? Well, not today, but maybe tomorrow. Is it going to ruin your day? No, I could get the next bus. Okay, and what are you going to do about it tomorrow? Well, I'm going to get there 5 minutes early. Asking these probing questions enables you, gives you some tool to manage your emotions better, to think more reasonably, and to understand what is in and what is outside of your control. Because those are by no means easy things to do. And the Stoics understood that this is going to be incredibly difficult to do if you're just sitting there and thinking. And so the Stoics say to you, take a pen and paper and do this exercise before you go to bed. Write it down, do this Socratic questioning in your mind and put it on pen and paper, put it out there. And so ask yourself questions, be honest, write it down. And Epictetus says, before you go to bed today, and you could all do this tonight, ask yourself 3 simple questions on pen and paper. What did I do today that was good? What did I do today that wasn't good? And what could I do tomorrow to be better? And these don't have to be very abstract, conceptual things. They could be very minor things. Today, I didn't speak as eloquently as I'd have liked. Today, I gave a talk. Tomorrow, I'm going to practice writing in order to improve, etc. And by continuously doing this, you actually keep yourself in check. You have this self-review of the day. And the Stoics understood how powerful this actually is. And then finally, this amor fati tattoo, these Stoic quotes that we see on Instagram, although they are a diluted version of a much more comprehensive philosophy, there is something quite powerful about these maxims, these quotes, these reminders. And Epictetus has this quote here. He says, good maxims, if you keep them often in mind, will be just as beneficial as good examples. And so, am I saying get a tattoo? You don't have to. A post-it note will do, but there's something very powerful about having a quote or some sort of visual reminder of a principle, of a system of ideas, because when you see it, it's like, oh yeah, I gotta remember to cultivate this principle. I gotta remember to act in this particular way. Every morning when I wake up, I have this massive quote in front of me that motivates me and really gets me energized for the day. And there's something incredibly powerful about that, and the Stoics recognized it. And I think there's something to be said about just looking at how popular Stoicism has become. It's partly because of this. People will see a Stoic quote and be motivated, reminded of a particular principle or a character trait that they want to develop. And so these are 3 things that you can take away and implement today. And now I want to go back to the 3 Stoics that we mentioned. I have to emphasize this once more. As much as Stoicism as a complete philosophy, as a complete view of the world and existence and our nature is false, is harmful, there is unbelievable value in reading these 3 men. Every single time I read Seneca, and I've read him several times, when I read his Consolations, I'm in awe. They are so beautifully written, so poetic, that it doesn't matter that sometimes he says things I disagree with. I love reading him. It is an absolute pleasure, and I can't recommend it enough. In Seneca, you will learn so many valuable principles, and he'll really provoke your thought. Epictetus, his discourses are incredibly interesting. You get insight into the inner thoughts of a very damaged individual, an individual who lived the first few decades of his life as a slave. Marcus Aurelius, when do you ever get a chance to peer into the mind of the most powerful man in the world? And this is not just a book that he wrote, this is his private journal entries. It almost feels wrong to just open that book, and it should be, but there's something incredible in doing so. And so, if there's one thing I urge you to do is please do read these Roman Stoics. I want to read you this quote by Seneca. He's talking about what we get when we engage with these past thinkers. He says, "We can argue with Socrates, express doubt with Carneades, cultivate retirement with Epicurus, overcome human nature with the Stoic, and exceed its limits with the Cynics. None of them will exhaust your years, but each will contribute his years to yours. With none of these will conversation be dangerous, or his friendship fatal, or attendance on him expensive. From them you can take whatever you wish. It will not be their fault if you do not take your fill from them. What happiness, what a fine old age awaits the man who has made himself a client of these. He will have friends whose advice he can ask on the most important or the most trivial matters, whom he can consult daily about himself, who will tell him the truth without insulting him and praise him without flattery, who will offer him a pattern on which to model himself." I couldn't agree more with Seneca here. And if you've ever read the Stoics and wished that you were able to argue with Socrates, to argue with Marcus Aurelius, to debate with Seneca, well, now you can. I want to introduce you to XG University, the startup that I'm working on. We are bringing back to life history's greatest minds, including Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. I'm going to give each of you a link to access our platform, to be the beta testers and actually engage with Marcus Aurelius, debate with Epictetus, cultivate wisdom with Seneca, and engage with these unbelievably brilliant thinkers. So I hope that you don't take away Stoicism bad, let's throw the whole thing out. There is incredible value in engaging with the Stoics, and I hope to see you all on our platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the talk. I haven't read any Stoics, but the idea of like being Stoic, I sort of kind of just rejected that idea. I'm quite a passionate person, so that's why I didn't really like go out and seek it, but I definitely will be. I was wondering whether or not there were any Stoics that like truly question some of the base tenets of like determinism and specifically the disconnects of the internal world being able to affect the external world, because like just it feels self-evident that even when you talked about writing down your inner thoughts, that is the internal world having some sort of effect on the external world. So I was wondering whether or not there were any that did question those base tenets.
Yeah, so I tried to make this point in the talk. There isn't a single Stoic that actually practices the Stoic philosophy. It's an impracticable philosophy, and the Stoics will tell you that. They'll tell you, we're setting an ideal here, you'll never be able to reach it, but that's fine. Well, actually, some of them say it isn't fine, but Epictetus, for instance, for Epictetus, yes, there's this ideal, and as opposed to what some of the previous Stoics have said, which is, if you don't reach this ideal, then you've got nothing. Epictetus says, well, actually, on the way to this ideal, you're making progress. And this progress is going to benefit you. And so, yes, there is this contradiction in the Stoic philosophy where every single thing they do somewhat undermines this idea that there's this separation between the internal and the external world, the way that they see it. And some Stoics do recognize this, and yet that is what is implied and necessitated by their philosophy. So the point I tried to make was that there is a very big distinction to be made between Stoic philosophy and the lives and writings of some of the Stoics. Because what is implied by the determinism, by the pantheism, by this complete separation of the external world is different to any prescriptive principle, or somewhat in clash with any prescriptive principle that Seneca is going to tell you. Or Epictetus, for him saying that on the way to this ideal, you're actually improving yourself and you'll never be able to reach it, but that's fine. So it depends which Stoics you read. There are Stoics as a whole were an incredibly eclectic bunch. They're very mixed individuals because there doesn't seem to be, almost beside of the essential things that I've said here, a single thing that they all agree on. They have strong disagreements in epistemology. Even in the metaphysics, it's not so evident that all of them believed in this pantheistic existence. Some of them, for instance, definitely believed in individual gods like Zeus and other deities. So when I was talking about Stoicism, I'm talking about the philosophy as it was originally incepted, as the most essential ideas in that philosophy, and by no means how any particular Stoic lived, because they definitely didn't live in according to that system.
Do you think that this dichotomy of control is kind of protection, your mental protection? And the question is, how would you, how can you understand that it's not about apathy, but about silence and about your calm? Like, how can you manage it? Like, where is the difference for you? Thank you.
Let me see if I understand that. You're asking the dichotomy of control, as opposed to being a means of achieving apatheia, is a means of achieving tranquility and calmness, right?
Exactly.
Okay, well, the Stoics say the same thing, because apatheia to them is not complete apathy. There's a slight distinction between apatheia and apathy. Apathy is a lack of care from whatever it is that happens, external things, for instance, whereas apatheia is more of freedom from. Those aren't the things that are going to influence you in the most important way. Rather, it's virtue that's going to be more important. Virtue is the most important thing. The problem is that if you truly integrate this particular concept into the Stoic view of the universe, apatheia becomes apathy. It becomes the exact same thing because, again, if you try to lose anxiety, some sort of fear of the future, you lose excitement of the future. And every single negative emotion has a positive corollary. And when you quash that negative emotion, you lose out on the correspondent positive experience that you could have. And so learning to understand what is in and outside of our control is the most important thing that you can do. It is the key to actually achieving tranquility of mind. And the Stoics were after that. The difference is what the Stoics viewed was in their control. And what the Stoics viewed was in their control was this limited world of inner states of consciousness that have no impact on your life outcome or the world out there. And so it is true, understanding that the dichotomy of control, and I tried to make this point in the talk, is essential if you want to live a good life. Because too often we take actions that either we know are futile, but we take them anyway, or we haven't thought about them enough. So we just take them on some sort of, either our emotions drive us, it's some sort of just reflexive whim that we do something, thinking that it will make some change, knowing that it won't, but not actually digging deep enough to figure out that it's not going to. So by actually understanding what is in your control, what is outside of your control, and acting on it, that's really important too. It's not just understanding it, but it's actually acting when something is in your control and not acting when it isn't, because it's a waste of time. By doing that, you do actually achieve a state of tranquility, of peace, of calmness, which is what the Stoics were trying to get. But they live in a different universe and a different world. So their understanding of it is very different.